Hello and welcome to XPol. Today I'm talking with Simon Horn, also known as Charlie Bly. Simon is a singer-songwriter, producer, musician and educator hailing from Australia and currently based in Germany. He was one of my tutors in university where he taught bass guitar, music theory and band performance. He has played over 2,000 concerts worldwide with several bands and musical projects, including Frank Gambale, Michael Lane and Vimala. In this episode, we discuss the evolutions of the music industry over the past 25 years and the way it was altered by the advent of the internet and of digital content. We also get into Simon's experiences being part of the music scenes of Sydney, London and Berlin, and the way his approach to songwriting and branding has developed over time. We end the podcast by talking in depth about teaching and the fundamentals of a good music education. As always, you can find footnotes at the end of the podcast, which will be indicated by this sound. And without further ado, here is Simon Horn.
Hello, Simon Horn. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hello, Baptiste. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. You've been my teacher, my bass teacher for more than 3 years. And yeah, I think we could have a nice and interesting episode here. I have a tons of questions for you. And maybe the first one is that it's a question about musicians in the 21st century and musicianship in general. Because I feel like today, to be a successful or a good musician, however we measure that, you have to be much more than just someone who's able to play the saxophone well or to write a song on the piano. You have to be kind of a polymath or a renaissance man. You have to have all these skills in like different areas: marketing, business, video editing, you name it, teaching, so many things. And so I wanted to start off by asking you, you've been in the music business for a little while, and how do you feel the landscape has changed between when you first started, when you first entered the business, and now? And also, especially since you've been playing music in different countries and everything, I'd love to have your point of view on that.
Well, I guess the sort of my era of my generation, we were sort of between the old school and the new school, I would say. Like, I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, and then really was doing music in the 90s. And that was sort of, I remember a friend having a Mac computer when we were at university, and he showed me the internet and was just like, dude, like, what is that? And I was just like, his parents were pretty well off and he could obviously afford a computer. And I was just like, wow, he can go online. And we just didn't know what it was, it was just this thing. So the kind of what they call the gatekeepers of the industry, like the record companies, et cetera, there was a filter system, and it was always like a bit of a lottery. And the old school way of doing it was, you get a band and you tour and you get in front of people, really. That's how you get known. And it was the radio and the TV that was controlling the media aspect of it. So, and I never forget I used to work in a record store in Sydney, in Crow's Nest, and a publisher used to come in all the time. And have you ever seen the movie High Fidelity?
No, never.
Okay, so you need to check out High Fidelity because it's a really cool movie. It's John Cusack, Jack Black.
Okay.
I can't remember the other people. It's like a 90s movie, but it's based in a record store. And this record store was pretty much how our record store was in Sydney. So it was a bunch of musicians and we'd just hang out, drink coffee, listen to music, and like not abuse customers, but say, why are you buying this? This is crap. Like, seriously, like, put that away. And we would go and select like, great music for them. And they kept on coming back because they were really appreciative of having someone tell them, discipline them about music. Anyway, so there was a publisher there, music publisher, and we got to know him, and I said, I guess it kept on saying, I'd write some songs, and can I give you a demo or something? And every time I saw him, I'd say this, and he was like, well, okay, come on, give me a demo. I was like, oh shit, okay. So I had to, went home, and in those days I managed to get, this was like 99, I think, 98, 90, I had a laptop. I made some demos on a mini disc and this little studio setup I had, and I put it on a cassette tape and I gave it to this guy. And then we went to made an appointment, and he didn't like the songs I sort of wrote and sung, but there was an instrumental song called Nova Daze, which is on the SoundCloud link there. And he said, I know someone who's looking for this sort of chill out trip hop stuff. So, I was like, wow, okay, that was a bit of a turnaround in the conversation. So he sent it. Well, I can't remember the story. No, I think I sent a CD, actually. I managed to burn a CD don't know how I did that. And I sent it to this guy, Philip Mortlock, at Origin Music, who'd signed like In Excess and some, big Australian bands. And I called him up one day and said, hi, Simon Horn, I sent you a CD. And I never forget the words, I get a lot of CDs,
Yeah.
And then I explained it was this chill out track called Nova Daze. And his tone of voice really changed. It was like, oh, wow, yeah, I got that. I really like that. Do you want to come in for a meeting? And I was just like, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, So anyway, the rest is kind of, I got a publishing deal. I'm still in contact with him. I could have done a lot more music. I did do a lot of music, but he still loves that song. It's like 20 years later, he's like, do a remix, do this. So anyway, so the point of this story is really that I was in his office and I saw all the CDs, the piles of CDs in his office that they used to sit there and listen to. And now that really becomes like, I guess it's YouTube, it's Spotify, it's SoundCloud, that the A&R people still do listen to stuff. I think that was a sort of a glimpse into the world of, and another band I had in Australia was called the Gadflys, and they're still going. And I recorded a few tracks on an album at festival studios, and Silverchair had just been in the day before or the week before. There's Australian band Silverchair, and I was like 24 or 5, and I was like, yeah, this is it. I've hit the big time. But it was just so great to be in a massive studio and just doing it. And so again, the point is really that there was a sort of a boundary or like a gatekeepers to get into the industry, which was pretty hard. So, if you had talent or if you met the right people, I would say that my whole career has really been built around contacts and knowing the right people, going to places and really connecting. And so sort of to flip it on its head now is like, all of a sudden, I think I heard somebody else say a while ago that even the record companies just have got no idea how to navigate their way through this thing called media or the music industry or the internet, because it's just too big, so how can one person do that? So, I mean, I guess like your generation, you what they call a digital native, aren't you?
Almost, I would say. I don't know. Thankfully, I was not born with a tablet in my hand. I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, sure.
But I grew up with it, definitely. Yeah, I can remember the sound of AOL connecting when I was a kid, like that.
Wow, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, screeching sound.
I think it's quite interesting that you asked that question because, we're musicians who are from two different generations and maybe neither of us know the answer. And maybe it's because the whole thing is always changing so much. Does that answer your question? Well, your question was, how has the landscape changed?
Yeah, how have you perceived it?
Well, I mean, I guess to sort of go back to the gatekeepers, and then they don't exist anymore. Like you can, if you've got a bit of IT skills and marketing skills, you can upload a song to YouTube, and it's the algorithms these days, isn't it, that actually will put you into playlists and do all this stuff. So, if you've got talent and you've got a song that people are looking for, and this is going to go into a different tangent, maybe something else you want to talk about, but people aren't really looking for music. They're looking for a mood, or they're looking for something to when they're, going for a run or being romantic or et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like, it's not really about the artist anymore. It's like, I think people find the artist afterwards and maybe become a fan or a fanboy, fangirl. But I think initially it's people are flicking through files and listening for sounds and saying, yeah, I like that. Consumerism, isn't it?
It's really interesting. I don't know if you heard about, probably Eric Satie, the French composer from the beginning of the 20th century. He wrote this furniture music. I think it's called musique d'ameublement in French. And the concept was that, and it was a concept that was completely crazy at the time. The concept was that people would listen to this music while doing something else. Because back in the day when you played music, everybody was turning and stopping what they were doing to listen. Because hearing music was it was not a daily experience, So people were giving music their undivided attention. And his idea was to do furniture music, so mood music, basically, music that would be there in the background. And so he wanted to play at restaurants, but I read that actually it's paid because people would stop eating to listen to the music and watch the musicians. And now it sounds completely crazy to us because there are all these playlists. It's really interesting. I was listening to Aphex Twin on Spotify, and his track, April 14th, I think, has so much more listens than the other ones. And I was wondering why. and turns out he landed on the $1 million playlist, which is Sleep by Spotify. So every night people are listening to his track in their sleep. And yeah, it's just like you said, this whole playlist business is it's a really new way of consuming music, and it's really strange. I feel like the ways of consuming music have just exploded. Like now, before there was maybe one way, now there are thousands, maybe not thousands.
Yeah, so I guess that's an amazing thing, isn't it? So, but it's also a pretty scary thing because you've also got more people trying to do it, and it's a lottery. It always has been a lottery. It's really interesting that Eric Satie is, this concept's been around for well, when was Eric Satie?
100 years ago.
100 years ago. That's mental. So it shows something about the human sort of psyche, mind, that we're looking for this thing. So I guess the internet like the whole Napster thing is, we were sort of, copying music for years, like from vinyl to radio to tape, and the internet has just exploded things. Really, that's all it's done. So I think it depends what view you want to take on it. It's a tool, and I think if you use it the right way, then all power to you. I think there's a saying: opportunity favors the brave. Opportunity favors the brave. So you've just got
to fortune favors the bold, I think.
Fortune favors the. I'm tired. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. You can be my rephraser.
Yeah, I mean, my English saying skills are not, but yeah, that's the one I know. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's very. I don't know. What do you think about? Do you think that the fact that music is omnipresent, that is everywhere in like shops all the time, on the phone when you're waiting, do you think that it cheapens music in a way, or do you think that is actually the opposite, that it brings music to the people?
I think it brings music to the people. And I think at the end of the day, I think there's a communication aspect. There's also healing power in music. There's something that it does to us that, yourself, if you don't play music, I think that you're a musician if you start getting withdrawal symptoms, if you haven't played your instrument or listened to an instrument or listened to music. And I think even on a non-musician aspect, I think people crave it. I think it's just something within human psyche that we just love. Like my wife loves disco music, so so it's kind of, that's a mood, isn't it? It's like a upbeat kind of, I want to feel good. It's a feel good thing, isn't it? So, but there's obviously now, as we're talking about, this music for every mood, etc., etc. So yeah.
Do you feel like, I don't know, do you feel like there was, because many people would tell that the 80s, the 90s were a golden age of sorts. Do you feel this way, or do you think it's just a nostalgia that is maybe making us feel this way? Because I don't know, I was not alive in the 80s, but I've been growing up listening. And actually that's funny, because I remember talking to you and you told me, oh, I grew up on Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. And I also grew up on Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. So something happened there. We're two different generations, yet we grew up on the same music. So I don't know, is it Groundhog's Day for the rest of times? Did like something happen in the Matrix, or?
Something happened in the Matrix.
Yeah.
Are we in the Matrix?
Oh, I think
I always thought we were in the Matrix. I think it's connection. It's human emotion. It's if you go back to the beginnings of not music, but popular music, rock and roll. It's like there's an energy there, isn't there? So if you mix, maybe the rock bands, without even knowing it, have tapped into a product, marketing a product that is actually what the masses want. You've got these rebellious teenagers who want to keep on being more rebellious than the previous generation, and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll stuff, all that stuff is sort of like, well, how do we put this into some sort of product? I know, we'll start a rock band and do all the bad stuff, so to speak, and write about all this stuff and express ourselves in ways that was probably seen bad before, and now it just becomes the normal. And again, I think there's something to be. You've probably heard this, but it's like people want to belong to a tribe. People want to belong to something, and I think that is a lot to do with music. And whether you're consuming music on Spotify to go and sleep, you're connecting to you're belonging to an emotion, or it's giving you a kind of a place of rest, or a place of like, I can't make sense of the world or whatever, but this song really helps me. It carries me through something. You hear all these stories about people going through rough times in their lives, and it was this song that got me through But when the songwriter wrote that, I know that some people write songs with that purpose in mind, but you get a lot of songwriters who just write something from their heart, and that's the human heart that connects to other human hearts. So I think the fact that there's still going to be, like, my kids will be growing up with Guns N' Roses, and probably your kids, they grow up with Led Zeppelin and AC/DC. It's just, people say rock and roll's dead, but people also do grow up with Justin Bieber. But I talked to my students at BIM about this as well, and the same sort of conversation, and they said, well, we grew up with that, but then we also had the sort of the current music of whatever, 2005, whatever it was. So I think it's, again, it comes back to this accessibility, and it's like, there's just, the menu is just so broad, isn't it? So it's like I think I was, you want to kind of jump up the queue on YouTube and get in with the algorithms, is that you do a cover that everyone's looking for, So I was looking for songs on Spotify, like, what songs that suit me to sing or play, can I actually play or sing, that, are popular, and so you start going through Spotify and looking for what songs have got the most hits, like millions of plays on this song. And it's quite interesting to see what I think would be a big song, and actually what is a big song, if that makes sense. I can't remember specific examples, but if you think about Jaco Pastorius, it's like, he was and he is one of the greatest bass players on earth. But Deantown by Wolfpack has got way more hits than Toontown. So it's kind of like, it's a generational thing. And you kind of have to ask yourself, if Jaco was still alive today, would he actually join the internet party, or would he just go, I can't be bothered?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, it's really hard to count things this way, because, for example, if we take Thriller by Michael Jackson, it's the album that sold the most, millions of copies. It's really interesting because when you sell a CD, it doesn't tell you how many times it was listened to. Maybe nobody ever listened to that CD, and maybe that particular CD was listened to like 10,000 times. It was like put on every day by a person. Whereas when you get like a view, it's another metric. So it's really interesting. Maybe much more people are listening to Jaco Pastorius on CD. I don't know. And I also feel like we have our bass and guitar heroes from the 70s, like Jaco or Jimi Hendrix. And in a way, it's interesting, because I feel like a lot of us spend more time loving them than listening to them. You know what I mean? Like, for example, if we take Jaco Pastorius as a bass player, I know his discography, but I have studied some of his bass lines, but I'm not an expert on Jaco Pastorius, because there are so many players that came afterwards. And so, yes, it's really interesting to see that our heroes are from the 70s, but it's almost like you cannot be a hero if you don't have the time for a narrative to develop. And also, I think it's a big part of it, but Jimi Hendrix or Jaco Pastorius, they've had hard lives, they've had violent deaths very young. And so it's also part of the narrative. There is much more to it than just the music.
Yeah, that sort of brings us to an interesting kind of angle on the whole music thing, is that, because there's a few things to talk about here, but there's a songwriting technique called writing universally. So it's not, if I just write a song that's, about me, and it's how I feel, but people don't really connect to it, but if I can put more of a universal approach on it, so there's a date and a time, there's a smell, there's a taste, there's some metaphors, then all of a sudden people start to identify with, actually I share the same story. And that's where this concept of that song really helped me through this time, or that song inspires me. So I think, going back to your question, is like, how's the landscape changed? I think we have like some data now. If you could think about the last 30 years as research, and now we have things like Spotify, YouTube, which give us pretty solid data to say, okay, where is my audience? What are they going to listen to? And, if you're smart, I was just watching something today about, synchronized, getting like sync music, music on TV and film. And so if you're smart and you get into this whole, what people want to be part of a story. They want to belong to something. They want to be part of a gang. And I'm just reading a book. It's called the story branding. So it's kind of like there's this, it's a marketing thing. And if you're into, well, I don't think any of us can't be into marketing these days because we just get drawn into it. You know, it's just like, if it's either on a subconscious level or it's on a conscious level. Some people have got a real art to actually just make it feel like they're giving you the answer that you've always been looking for, but really they're selling to you. You know, and some people get it slightly wrong and it feels like they're really trying to put something in your face. And anyway, so there's this guy's come up with a formula about, you know, developing stories, and it's like, I think in a nutshell, it's like you have a hero who has a problem, and then you need a guide that's going to help them solve the problem, and then the guide provides a plan to get them to the solution to fix the problem. So if you think about any movie, any song, you can apply these steps to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, if you think about Star Wars, Luke is the hero, Obi-Wan is the guide, and the Force is the plan, so to speak. You know, so whether or not this is a technique that's just happened, like a formula, that's a template that's been sort of locked into over the years, or whether or not this guy's actually just done some research and put it all in a book. But to sort of summarize, a story really does connect people, and it makes people, there's adventure, there's excitement, they belong, they're part of, you know, it ticks a lot of the boxes.
Tension and release.
Exactly, yeah. It's like any music, yeah.
Very interesting. I mean, I feel like another consequence of the internet might be, on some level, and of course the human experience, just like you were mentioning, it stays the same. But on some level, there is a fragmentation of people's culture or cultural references. Because maybe before, in the 70s, 80s, before, radio and television brought people together. They had like a common background or basis. And there were superstars like, I don't know, The Who, Michael Jackson, or the Rolling Stones, you know, that were like planetary superstars. But now with the internet, it's not like there is only one MTV. You can create your own culture and you can access different things. So if you're like a 50s jazz fan and maybe you like Afro-Cuban jazz, you can listen to that for weeks, for months, for years at a time, and you will never run out of content. And so we can very much live in our own bubbles. And it's very interesting to try to think about that and how we can create music for people that are evolving in so many different directions.
Yeah, completely. But then you also get a hybrid bubble, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because everything's like a conglomerate, you know, it's like if you're mixing, you know, there's so much, if we sort of jump over to technology and plugins and stuff, you know, the sound of the Beatles was because of Abbey Road, you know, but now I can have Abbey Road in a plugin, but I can also have the East Coast of America and the West Coast of America in a plugin, and all these mixing consoles and microphones actually get coded into simulating sounds. And it's like, well, that creates a new sound, you know, and you could argue that all music from maybe the last 10, 15 years is starting to sound the same. You know, does the Foo Fighters still sound like the Foo Fighters did back in sort of mid-90s, or have they kept their identity, or has it started to sort of drift into something else? I think their latest album, Concrete and Gold, I think it was a couple of years ago, they had I can't remember is it Skrillex or something?
Oh yeah, really?
I think so. So it's like pretty left field combination. And you listen to the music and go, well, it's taken them in a different direction, but it still sounds like the Foo Fighters. So I think that whole mashup really, it creates a new sound, but I think we lose some of the purity of the music and of the culture, like you're talking about. And if you think about any of this, the sort of stuff before the internet or before the digital age, it was people hanging out in a bar, you know, like bebop or rock and roll, or, do you know what I mean? It's very, like, it's not just about the music. There's so much about the clothes, what they're drinking, the food. So you could really go into some sub sections of that. And now it's like we really, I had another friend say, you know, the earth is really one country now, and all the different countries are cities. Like it's all one neighborhood, and it's just smaller. It's really small, and it's all the one thing. So but maybe within that, like you said, you do find your gang, your subculture, and then that's your bubble. That's where you stay. So yeah, I think you've got to, maybe it happens naturally. I think maybe some people get lost in it all. I mean, at the moment I'm sort of going through I'm trying to do some artist development with myself, and it's really like, well, who am I in this whole thing? Do I need to, as a session musician, you're always, on one side, you're always like becoming something else for somebody else. So you can sometimes lose some of who you are just because you're getting paid to play some music. But on the other hand, it's also a really rich tapestry of influences, so at the moment I'm trying to figure out, well, okay, who's Simon Horn? Or if I have an artist name, which is Charlie Bly, it's like, who is that guy? Like, what's my message? What do I stand for? What do I want to say? What's my story? And how does that connect to people? Like, if I'm really do I just do music for me, or am I doing music that I want to sell, which means then I have to join the marketing story, so to speak, or the concept, and say, well, who's my target audience and what am I selling to them, really, without doing the hard sell.
How was that process of you starting out as a bass player, playing in different bands in Australia, and evolving to someone who is very much conscious of having an artist image and developing yourself? How was this process?
I think it's still in progress. Maybe I'll never figure it out. It's a pretty big question, because I think if I go back to working in the record store, and I think in your 20s, you're really sort of just trying everything and experimenting in lots of different ways. And I think without even realizing it, I sort of, you gravitate towards what you can do, your strengths, I guess. So I guess my strengths were sort of rock pop, but I also play blues and a bit of soul and jazz stuff. And I guess people call you, or now they email you for a gig because they like what you do. So, and at the end of the day, you have to make a living, don't you? So sometimes I think when I got my publishing deal in Sydney, I was like, yeah, this is it. I've cracked it, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. I really needed to write maybe 100, 200 songs and be prolific and be really focused and be, that's when the hard work really started. But my dad has another English saying is, you can't put you can't put an old head on young shoulders or something. My sayings aren't great today. But, I was just young and was like, I'll do it. I wasn't so disciplined, and you're a free spirit. So you sort of fly with the wind a bit. And obviously I went from Australia to England, and now from England to Germany, and you sort of hit the late 30s, 40s, and you start thinking, where am I? Where am I at? So I think I'm really grateful for all the people I've played with, and also developing my skills and I guess sort of semi-career as a teacher. But now I'm trying to get back to some sort of creative identity. So it's quite interesting to go back and look at who I was like 20 years ago. And like, he was a lot different person. I think I suffer from a bit of, it's just a stupid thing in my head that's like, you get older, so you have to become more sensible, or get a haircut, get a real job, or something stupid like this. Like, can I really play music for the rest of my days? I don't know, maybe it's a bit of a midlife thing, but I'm sort of doing some soul searching now for, like, who was I in my 20s and what was the fire, and can I rekindle some of that? Like, it's still me, it's still there. Obviously, as you get older, physically you and mentally, things start to slow down a bit. But I think for me, it's a really great challenge to stay young and to stay fresh, and to maybe try to do things a little differently. And if you look at any of the great musicians, I mean, David Bowie is not with us anymore, but Sting is 68, 60, 69, and it's like, wow, there's some still musicians who are really, I'm not saying that Sting's probably not groundbreaking anymore, but he's still doing it. There's still this hunger to create. And I think if we can, to any musician at any age, I think if you can sort of maintain that and discipline yourself, then you're really looking at the long view. I think when I was younger, I suffered from, I want to be a rock star and I want to get rich, and that's it. I'll die at 27 when I was, like Jimi Hendrix or Jeff Buckley or something. But if it's just about being creative, so I guess we're now into this place of, there's two things. There's the music industry and there's music, and they're two separate things, really. So I think for me, it's really this sort of development or search is really about about being a musician, being a creative person. And I think I kind of like having a goal, and I like having a purpose. So that's why I have to put on a label on it, which maybe that's not the best thing, because I think a coach once said to me, just let go of the outcome, because I kind of think, well, I want to be Flea, or I want to be this person. And so I would just be you. And it's about, again, it goes back to the story. It's about the journey. It's not really about the, how many likes you're going to get on Facebook. And I think for me, that's the hardest thing, is my generation is like, it's such a direct feedback now. Like you post something, you say something, and all of a sudden the audience is saying something back in your face. Whereas I think the artists that we're talking about back in the 70s and 80s, they could just hide in the mystery of being an artist. They don't have to engage with the audience, so to speak.
Yeah, this proximity thing is definitely changing the game. I wonder if, do you feel like what makes this line of work special is the fact that there is no path, and that you have to design your own path on the one hand, and on the other hand, that there is, musicians have always been and still are marginals in a way, and so that there is this societal pressure. Would you agree with that?
Sorry, say that again. There's a societal pressure.
Yeah, in a way.
Like a pressure from society.
Yeah, to find quote unquote a real job. Like there is something, there is this strange dynamic where if you've quote unquote made it, all of a sudden people will find 1,001 ways to see that you're a genius. And if you haven't made it, like people said, oh yeah, you must have done something wrong. So there is this like post-rationalization thing where, if like somebody goes successful with anything these days, and it can be complete garbage because it has so many views, because like there is this tendency to justify, to like find a way to call it genius, and vice versa. Like oh, if this is only touching a tiny number of people, it must not be that, that special. I feel like we're losing a dimension there, because yes, of course you can have millions of views, but people are listening to you while they're driving their car, or you can have only a couple of hundreds, but people are sitting there crying, transcribing this, learning to play it on several different instruments, playing it at funerals, like crazy stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And yeah, I think there's a massive struggle as an artist, is to sort of say, well, don't listen to the noise. Really, I think you really have to be focused about who you are, and what your message is and what you stand for. And I think if you haven't figured that out yet, then you need to figure that out. And that's the process I'm going through at the moment. It's like, well, yeah, sure, I'm a session musician. I can play bass and sing a few covers, but what do I actually want to say? And I think I've actually hidden a lot, in the session musician role for a lot of years. But it's also, without going into too much sort of personal details or emotional stuff, but it's like, fear is a pretty dangerous thing. It's like, and also like I said about like, how do you quantify success, or what is success? So what you just said is like, actually you can really pull it apart and say, well, yeah, you've got 1 million views, but actually what does that mean? Like, you're going back to the CD thing you were saying. Like, I've played some of the tapes back in the day, like, broke because I played them so much, but the artist didn't get any more royalties because I played them more. So I don't know. I know this is really a conversation about these topics, but from my generation to your generation, do you feel like there's still the same pressures about it's not, you can't justify yourself as a musician, or there is this element of, we do live this sort of whole pop culture, the whole, Britain's Got Talent, or The Voice of Germany, all these things, there's this sort of short-term success, as opposed to, a long-term career. So I'm just musing a bit here. So I think maybe a way to secure our positions as musicians is to have longevity, is to have a long view. And I think the way you do that is by having a consistent output. For me, I don't release stuff at the moment because I don't think it's good enough. I sort of listen to my stuff and think, well, it's not as good as this person or that person. But that comes back to a personal struggle, I guess. But really, it's like if I had released a lot of music over the last 20 years, then I'd have a back catalogue of stuff on iTunes or Spotify, and there's a profile there. And people sort of go, well, what it's like with your favorite band. Like, you don't like all the songs, So if you look at it from the audience's point of view, it's like, well, it's okay to release some music that's not great. You know, you're not going to always get it right. I think you have to sort of, I know, I have to take some of the pressure off myself. It's like, it's okay. Just, it is the journey. It's the process. So just to release the music, and the stuff that I've sort of released or had some success with, some people say, I like it. And some people say, I don't like it. Like you're not always going to make everyone happy, you know? So again, it comes back to your goal of like, well, what do you want to do? Are you doing this because you want to make money, or you want to, like, what's your intent? It's a really great book by Michael Beinhorn, Music Production. And one of the things I got from that book was like, you know, what's your intent as a music producer? If you're producing someone, you know, what's the intention of the artist? What's the intention of the producer? Because the producer obviously has to guide the artist to the end result. So I think intent is a really quite an interesting word you could start to unpack that for a lot of things. Like,
it's an interesting thing. You asked me how it might be different for my generation. I don't really know, to be honest, because of course, I mean, I have my own experience only, but yeah, one of my friends and the singer of one of my bands actually told me that it's really hard to go out and sing your heart out when you see all these people on the internet that are just master singers, or maybe they are cheating a little bit, but that are just so good at what they do. And, you know, I don't know, it must be very different. I remember picking up the bass guitar, and the first videos I saw on YouTube were videos of Victor Wooten. That's a very different experience, I'm imagining, than picking up the bass in the 70s and being completely ignorant, blissfully ignorant of what is going on, and just doing your own thing and maybe creating something unique with your friends on the bass who need a bass player. So extremes in any domain have much more screen time than anything else, because we are attracted to faster, harder, stronger, you name it, you know? And so that's a bit like what your friend said. In a way, we are comparing ourselves not to people in our city or in our country, but to people in the world. That's going to change things a lot, and maybe it creates a lot of fear. Maybe I'd like to pivot there and ask you a question about the fact that you're a teacher, because do you feel like teaching students who have learned music on the internet mostly, do you feel like it makes a big difference? Can you notice musicians are different, or not really?
I think so. I mean, there's a sort of saying that you cut your teeth. It's a bit of an old school saying. It's like, I cut my teeth on doing these gigs. I think at the end of the day, for me, it's like, I think it says on my website, I've done 2,000 gigs, 20 years, 100 gigs a year, which 100 gigs a year isn't that many, really. If you do 3 gigs a week, then it's like 150, isn't it? Anyway, so I reckon playing really makes a person and really makes a musician, because there's so many skills that you get from playing live. Even when I was like 25 years ago, it was the tail end of what they called in Australia, there was a sort of the pub rock scene. And there was, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, you could go and see live music like 6-7 nights a week. And I think in the 90s, they were sort of reduced down to 3 nights a week. And now I know that Sydney has really, like, all the bars and clubs and have closed, etc. So, and now because of, you know, Corona, COVID-19, everything's closed. So we without going on to the next topic, it's in a really interesting position. So I think it's really rare these days that I see a student who can really play, like, who has a natural kind of sort of maturity and a depth at a young age, I would say, if that makes sense. Like, there's one guy I play with in Berlin, he's Wood Jacobs. He's a young guy from Chicago, and he's 26, and that kid can play, but he's been playing in bars since he was like 13, 14. Like, he cut his teeth. You know, you've got to play 5 sets a night, get $50, and you do that 3 or 4 times a week. Then, so from a kind of development point of view, it's like, maybe we don't realize, maybe the 10,000 hours isn't really enough. You know, because I know that from doing certain gigs and certain bands, it's like, if you play, it's really nice to do like 5-6 gigs in a row, or 2 weeks of the same gig, because at the end of it, and that machine is really well oiled, and it's like it's a sixth sense. Like, you're connected on a deeper level. Like, the music really takes on like a whole new dimension, and you carry that with you wherever you go as a musician. So I think if you've been sitting in your bedroom and just playing with the internet, or maybe you've had some jams with people, I think I don't know how you would get the same kind of depth of experience. So to answer your question, yeah, I see it. Very rare, like I said, there's very rarely do I see I see talent for sure, but I don't see like a real depth of musicianship. Yeah.
Yeah, so you would say that a common thread would be that your students haven't had that much playing time, like in a live setting. That is something that becomes more and more rare.
Completely, yeah, for sure. And the only way that that's ever going to happen is people taking the risk and just going, obviously when things have opened up again. Maybe you can do it on the internet, but you have to do a live stream every night, you've got to maybe that's it. I mean, but there is something about this culture of moving and this nomadic experience. And that's really what attracted me to music, was like this idea that you're in one town. And I mean, I've done gigs where we don't know where we are. It's a blur. Like you do 6 weeks of the same gig and you're like, where are we tonight? It's the same bus, same food. Like it's, and for me, it also has a downside. You're just a robot in the machine, and you get a lot of musicians who just burn out. So that's a pretty strange paradox, that to become this great musician, you have to have all this experience. At which point you just burn out and collapse in a heap.
Yeah, that sounds like a very dire portrayal of what's actually going on. But yeah, it makes sense. Like, I mean, the days of residencies are gone. It still happens, of course. But before, like, I don't know, it was common for a jazz band to get a residency in a club for a month and just to play there, I don't know, 2-3 sets a night. And now it's just not a thing anymore. Now you got to be on the road all the time.
Yeah, completely. Crazily enough, this is a bit of a side story, but I did this webinar with with eBass Guitar, who's another kind of internet bass learning thing. And I had this guy just out of the blue just contact me afterwards and said, "Hey, it's Lance from I used to come into your record store in Sydney, Australia." And I was just like, "Who the heck is Lance?" So I looked him up on Facebook. He's like, "Oh, it's Lance." It's this guy that and he used to come to our gig. We had a residency for three years, and it was at this bar in North Sydney. It was called the Greenwood. It was an old converted church into a bar, and we were there for every Friday night for three years. And for the first year, it was like, wow, this is awesome. This is great. And then you hit a point of like, we hate this. And we started depping it out. We were so bored. And so it went from being like a sort of jazz gig to a drum and bass gig to a funk gig to just turn up and play whatever gig. But I think the fact that you had an appointment, you had a deadline, even on a bad day, you didn't want to do it, you still went and did it. So that's, at the end of the day, that's discipline, isn't it? So
yeah,
I think if young musicians these days are really going to try to get to the same level of playing experience, then you've got to be disciplined and really say, okay, guys, I don't want to play tonight. Do you want to play tonight? No, I don't want to play tonight. We're not getting paid. Yeah, sure. Well, if we're out in a van on the road, we wouldn't get paid anyway. So you have to go on stage and you have to put on your webcam and you have to perform. Come on. And maybe that's what there's this whole thing of being authentic and vulnerable. Like maybe people want to see. Maybe, and you were talking about your friend before about it's pretty scary to sort of sing your heart out when there's so many great musicians on the internet. But maybe actually people want to see some human traits. People want to see some real stuff. It's like, hey, I'm not on it today. I mean, people have bad gigs, but no one. Well, I guess you do see it these days because people take mobile phones to gigs and they record bad performances by people, and that's just the downside of the internet, isn't it? But so maybe we have to allow ourselves, or the sort of younger generation of musicians, it's like, it's okay. You don't have to get it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't, just do it,
For sure. Generally, and that's like another question about education, because I'm really curious. I know that of course you've been teaching me and you're an educator, but I know as well that you've been studying pedagogy. And so I'm wondering, how do you know that as a teacher you're doing a good job? What are some signs that tell you and that you could, I don't know, like maybe it could be interesting for young teachers. And how do you know, first of all, to identify what type of students you have? I don't know if you've noticed that there are many types or not. And second of all, how do you know that you are doing the right thing to help that student on their way to becoming a better musician?
Yeah, well, if I go back to when I studied the postgraduate certificate in education, like, and when I was, using you guys as my guinea pig, the whole thing was formative assessment. So for those people out there, formative assessment it's just, if you turn in your webcam and you do a webcast or like a YouTube, in some aspect, this is a form of formative assessment, because, it's making you show up and actually perform, whereas a summative assessment is you get a grade for it at the end of a module, so to speak. So there's lots of different ways you can do these little quizzes, these hot seats that I think you guys did. So I think for me to see, your question was, how do I know when a student's actually learning something?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, are there different kinds of students out there? Do you notice that there are different quote unquote types? Or are there guidelines that are pretty like steadfast that you can follow?
I think the education world goes through different phases, like any kind of landscape. So you'll get some books who say it's all about peer learning. And then in a couple of years, it's like, no, it's more about facilitation and differentiation. So I think it's a combination of everything. I think as a teacher, you really have to be hitting or creating an environment which is safe, where people are inspired and people are challenged to the point of it could hurt, not physically, but it's tough. It's really hard to break through those challenges. So I know when a student is learning something, because they've taken the task and they've sort of gone above and beyond. So they've sort of looked at the concept, and then they've said, okay, well, it's not just there's a thing called surface and surface level and deep level learning. So they've gone to a far deeper level, and they've actually conceptualized, and they've actually recapitulated like their own version of something, and they've put their own identity on it. I think that would be when I would say, okay, this young lady or young man is really starting to understand the language of music and use it to express what they want to express. A side thought on that would be, these generally in a old school way, that you did this by just playing. You just did, and I think playing with a lot of older musicians was the way that people learn. And I think that's a thing that was sort of missing. So maybe if we're talking about how do you do it now, well, I think young players need to really find some older players to play with so they can learn, and then they perform on a regular level. But I think education, like places like BIM and Berkeley and all these places, really have become an artist development process, because the record companies don't really do artist development anymore. They want to see someone who's already got a million hits or whatever. So when you go to music school, you really are being put through the same process, or you're trying to achieve the same end result as what you would have done from 10 years of playing 5 nights a week. But I think some students just don't want to, this sounds a bit harsh, but I think some students just don't want to do the work. And I think some students are just naive to it.
Yeah.
And I was naive as well. I just wanted to, tour and be a rock star and do all that stuff. It's bloody hard work.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's relentless. And even when you thought it was hard enough work, it's even harder than that. So I think and that's what I'm saying. Like, sure, you can there's so much music out there, and there's so many people who are doing it, but it's like, well, how long are they doing it for? And what's their character, and what's their longevity for that? So I think in my sort of network of people on Facebook and students that I've taught before, it's like maybe 10% are still playing music.
Oh, really?
So there's a huge drop off, because you'll get to your late 20s and maybe you want to have a family, and you're like, how do I make music? How do I make music? How do I make money? At the end of the day, it comes down to making money while supporting or surviving. Survival of the fittest. But I mean, I can't really preach from the pulpit, so to speak, because I make a living from teaching. I mean, this is a really interesting discussion. I don't think I could survive just from doing gigs unless I'd had some, quite big success and I was but I mean, I know friends who are in pretty big bands and they go and do their tours and they still go back and do their day jobs, So it's like, this is, it's, I don't know if I'm the best person to say, hey,
yeah, but you're doing music every day. And the thing is, like, a lot of people, I mean, I don't know many people who are making money from gigs and living from it. Also, because even if you're making enough money to have a decent living, it's like, it's a very high risk thing, It's very sensible to disorder. So, like, for example, right now, you can be Beyonce, you're not going to be touring this month. So it's a dangerous thing, It's a bit like, I mean, maybe it's a bit far-fetched, but it's a bit like nuclear power and wind power, because, well, you can have windmills all over Germany and up the coast, but if the wind is not blowing, you're not getting any energy. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Whereas nuclear power, and also we are not very good at storing energy at the moment, so yeah, it sucks. But with nuclear power, it's pretty, or with like coal or whatever, you can just burn it or make it happen whenever you want. Or also, to talk about renewable energy with dams, a dam is great because you can just open it and the water is going to come down and that you're going to get energy. And also, if there are some hard times for any reason, the entertainment budget of people is the first one to take a hit. And so that's why I guess it makes sense to have eggs in different baskets, so to speak. And also be teaching. And maybe, and I don't know about you, but teaching music and playing music are very interconnected.
But it's a gig, really. And I think that's what I'm really grateful about teaching, is that, every lesson is like, I used to teach in a different way, and then I did my course, and it was like, it's not about me, it's all about the student. So there's sort of two chapters of my teaching. So I used to teach more from I get up in front of the class and do a demonstration, and then you do it, and I check to see how you're doing it. And I guess that worked to a certain level. It definitely made me have to really perform and to really know the parts and to really be on the piece, so to speak. But then sort of from studying, it's sort of like, well, it's not about me teaching, it's about you doing. So I think in the last few years, I ended up not really playing that much in class, because it's kind of like, and even it sort of teaching concepts get to the point where it's like, well, why should I demonstrate it? Like, get a student who can do it to show another student. So there's this whole concept of peer learning. Like, you guys, like, students learn from me, but they also learn from each other. So yeah, there is a connection between teaching and playing music, but it's like, sometimes I wish I could perform in class how I would on a gig. And that may sound crazy, but I just don't feel like it takes me a while to warm up, and it's a different environment. The adrenaline is different, like this performance aspect.
Yeah.
And I think in a small classroom, sometimes it's kind of quite under scrutiny. Like, it's probably just in my own head, but the students are like, well, okay, so now you do it, or you show us how to do it. Whereas I think on a gig, no one's in the audience really thinking that. They're just there to enjoy the music. So I think there's a different need and a different purpose. Intent, we go back to that word, intent. So the intention is different, really. So, but I think I was talking to you guys about it. It's like, students want to see some demonstration in class because they want to, it's different to seeing it on YouTube. It's in person, it's in a classroom, it's tangible, isn't it? But in London, I used to teach like 4 days a week, and now I teach 1 day a week. So if I think about, if you talk about chops, about being fit musically, it's like, I'm not really that fit musically, and I'm not really that fit teaching wise. So I'm somewhere in between. So I would say sure, you're playing music, but there's definitely a massive difference between being a teacher and being a performer. Yeah. This is, I don't know about what other teachers would say, but if you think about, you do 2 or 3 sets a night, and by the 3rd set, you're pretty warmed up, and you're playing things, you're accessing things. Yeah, you're in the flow, aren't you? And in a 90-minute class, maybe you play 5 minutes. There's actually more pressure to perform in a classroom than there is maybe on a gig.
Interesting.
Because you've got to really just deliver the goods. So I actually feel quite a lot of pressure from teaching and having to really do that due to the current situation. we just started teaching online for them this week. And yeah, because of the audio quality, I can't really demonstrate over Zoom because of the quality is horrible. So now I'm doing sort of 5-minute videos, just explaining exactly what the purpose of a bass line or a piece of music is and that's getting me to perform again. So that's quite maybe shifting to teaching online. It has this element of like, I have to demonstrate, otherwise there's no context. But maybe there's a challenge instead of, because you guys said, you said you were learning from YouTube. There has to be some, like, how can anybody doing a video, it's a real challenge to sort of say, what are the key elements to put into this 5-minute presentation that ticks a lot of the boxes,
Yeah, and that's a big challenge for all the people at the moment, figuring out how to do webinars and how to do content on the internet. Because I guess the big challenge is you can make the video, but you're asking a lot of the people who are watching, because you're asking them to watch it and you're asking them to act on it and to spend time working on it. So how do you manage to catalyze such a reaction? It's not easy.
Yeah, now we cross over back into the marketing thing, is because if you're trying to sell anything, you've got to tell people what they're going to learn, and these are really the learning outcomes. It's like, so from this video, you're going to learn how to, the slap bass technique. I think if you're doing videos online, you have to be like sort of 3 quick wins. Like, what are the learning outcomes? Like, what are you going to get from this? It's not like just learn slap bass. It's like learn how to bounce off the string so you can play, fast 16th notes, something like that. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I identify with that. I need that. Click. So I think, going back to your first question, as musicians, you can't just be a musician. So you've got to be a musician and educator, but then there's also an element of like psychology and marketing. Because if everybody else is trying to do it now, then how are you going to stick out?
I feel like it's really, really hard, because I don't know, there are some things that seem to be non-scalable. Like, for example, when I was learning with you, something that it wasn't conscious or anything, but something that is very important is the relationship that you have with your teacher. And you don't want to disappoint them on some level. You want to show them that you're like working, you're trying to be better. And so you have to find a way to recreate this relationship with the teacher. And I think that it's a very important thing, because with like YouTube videos, we are implicitly assuming that the student knows what is good for them. And maybe you would just like spend your days like clicking slap bass videos. And is that really what you need to learn? Maybe sometimes you need a teacher that tells you, well, slap bass is great, but maybe you need to learn a bit more about this or that, or playing with the drummer, or you need to have more repertoire, or you need to at some point learn the name of the notes on your neck, So that's a big question.
It comes down to the intent, isn't it? It's like, what do you, as a student, what do you want to learn? But I think, that relationship is very important. And there's some very successful online teaching businesses, but people don't like it. At the end of the day, they want to connect with the person. So just because I'm not mentioning any names here, but just because someone's got a really successful online teaching thing doesn't mean that you can't start one, because maybe people connect to you on a different way, a different level. So I think, on a positive note, we still do connect to people, and I think you just have to find your audience, or you have to find your students. The students have to find you.
Do you feel like there's a difference teaching in the midst of a music school and teaching private students? Do you feel like the music school ecosystem helps with the teaching?
I think it's sometimes with the music school, it's a bit too in a box. You're there to study a degree. You're there to get a piece of paper, a qualification. I mean, who's to say that what Berkeley teaches, or what BM teaches, or London School of Music, or any tertiary education, any university, who's to say that that's correct? Is it a surface level? Are they just learning something to get a piece of paper? Mm-hmm. And does that piece of paper actually qualify you to be a musician, or to be successful? Or whereas I think on a private level, like, I've got one bass student where we live, and it's now switched to online. But we have a Spotify playlist, and he just puts songs we have a shared playlist, and I just say, here's a few songs where you could sort of, where you're at and where you could go, and just so we kind of do maybe 2 or 3 of his and 1 of mine. So it's more about like what he wants to learn. And then from that journey, it's like, okay, well, you need to work on your rhythm, or you need to work on your technique. So it's like there is, the only end goal is that they're learning. They're actually, there's this intrinsic learning that they're like inspired, and I can see it. Maybe that was the answer to your question, is because I see the energy. I see when someone's inspired, they're just, and I can see when it's not. Like that was one of my biggest realizations as a teacher, is like, I stopped teaching what I thought they needed to know and actually just start teaching what they want to know. But on the flip side of that, some people don't know what they want. I mean, we have a small child and he doesn't know what he wants or needs. There's wants and needs, isn't there? We don't know what we want. We don't know what we need, So what I needed as a bass player years ago was to actually sit down and really nail my time and my technique. Again, it comes down to this work ethic and discipline. And I think when I was at jazz school, I was really, really focused. I was always practicing and really sort of wanted to achieve certain things, which was great. And then I think I just got a bit lazy, really. And I think it's the hard thing, is you really start to, you plateau a bit. You get to a certain level and go, hey, I'm doing gigs, I'm getting paid, people want me to do stuff. This is cool. And then we plateau. I think that's a really dangerous thing. So in terms of what, I used to teach from what I thought people needed, what I need, and that's what I thought was the same thing. But it's really like trying to see what they need, but I think there's some core skills that really need to be addressed for any musician, and that's your ears, time, and vocabulary. I think those 3 things are really well. There's technique involved in that as well, isn't there? Like technique is the sort of vehicle to vocabulary and to express yourself. And I think that's the thing in the classroom. You just can't really teach. How do you teach someone how to listen? I mean, I've done so many gigs where someone just calls a song and you never played it before, and you got to, like, what they call busk. You have to like really listen and figure it out. Like, where are we going and where does it go? And people are just throwing information around on stage, like 4-chord or bridge or
Scary.
It's very scary, but I love that. I think it's that's for me is like what keeps it alive. And this is the point for me. I'm a different person in the classroom to what I am on stage, is because sometimes I find myself on gigs just playing stuff that I didn't think was possible, or that if you gave me time to think about it, I wouldn't have played it. So in other words, I'm listening on like so many different levels, and I'm reacting like with split second intuition. So there's an intuition. I think that's a big difference between the intuition thing is a big difference between playing gigs and actually being in a classroom.
So you were surprising yourself.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of like I'm eliminating the element of thinking. I think too much in general. I don't think about stuff and actually just follow my intuition and react and listen. Then it's like, yeah, okay, that was cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sounding like I'm blowing my own horn. But I don't always get it right. But sometimes, and that's the thing, if I don't play a lot of gigs, this skill really suffers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if I do play a lot of gigs, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that muscle that really sort of comes to life when it's well oiled, so to speak. It's fit, So the main thing I got from when I was studying was just we played a lot. We just were always, every day we were jamming like 6-7 hours a day. I don't know if that was still prevalent at modern music schools. It seems like there's not enough content. There's not enough contact hours. And it seems like they always do this thing where it's like, oh, now it's up to you to do it. And it's like, well, maybe you're not ready to go and do it. But there's the whole sort of progression of, in the first year, we show you how to do it. The second year, we sort of have this balance. And by the third year, you just go and do it yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's that concept that you said before about, are there different types of students? And it's like, sure, there's loads of different types of students and personalities, and we learn different ways at different speeds. So I think it's pretty hard to put people in a box and say, okay, in 3 years, you're going to be able to do this. It's like, it's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure you've now realized. I mean, and then it comes again to the 10,000 hours rule, doesn't it, really? So But like I said before, is that enough? Like, if you look at any of the greats, it's, man, they practiced a lot, they played a lot, they wrote a lot. It's do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. And you've also got to have, feedback. And I think that feedback really comes from musicians around you, and especially older musicians.
What do you think about bands in general? Because I feel like the format band it's not as obvious in a way as it was in the past. Because before, if you wanted to play music, you needed to have other people, other musicians to assemble a band and actually have some music going on. Whereas now it's much more centered on the individual, I find, with like Instagram and Facebook. Plus you have all the technology that would allow one to record and play their music lives with the help of computers. You don't need to be an entire band to create music. Do you feel that there is this tendency? Do you think that it's a good or bad thing? And yeah, how do you see this whole thing evolving in the future?
I hope it changes, because I really miss bands. I miss being in a band. On the other hand, I hate being in a band. And I explain why. I think a band is such a great place for community collaboration, inspiration, team effort, all this stuff. And I think the end result is far more powerful than just one person. I think sure, I'm not saying that you can't have one person, a solo artist, but that person has to fill all the picture, has to fill the complete picture of what a band would do. Yeah, it's not just doing everything in terms of writing a song and producing it and marketing, and it's like they have to have a sound that is as big as a band, and that means that they have to have multi-dimensional aspects to their performance. They have to, first of all, have a great song, have a great voice, not to say great voice, but a voice that carries the song. I think Neil Young said, the song is the vehicle and the musicians are what driving it. So can one person drive a song, to really communicate it to the audience? So I don't think it's possible. I think there's some artists who can really do that, who can capture an audience and keep them there. And sometimes you think, actually, it's irrelevant if they have a band or not. If with a band, it's like, yeah, that sounds bigger and better. But it's like, for me, Jeff Buckley, there's a record called Live at the Chenet, I think. It's a little cafe in New York, and it was recorded maybe early 90s or mid 90s. And man, that performance is just outrageous. It's just, and then you hear him with a band and you're like, the band does add something, but I don't need the band. Like, he has just this delivery and musicality that just ticks all the boxes,
Mm-hmm.
So, but then you might get someone like, the NPR concerts, Tiny Little Desk concerts. I think I watched quite a few of those, and like Taylor Swift was on there, and I was thinking, oh yeah, what's she going to be like? But she did a great job. She's far talented than I thought she was. But that's just my naivety and not really checking out her music. But she could still carry the song, but I wouldn't put her on the level of someone like Jeff Buckley or Joni Mitchell. But I think the reality of having a band, even for me or for a lot of us, is like, I'm in my mid 40s, and to get a bunch of guys or girls together and rehearse every day and try to do the realities of being in a band, it's just impossible. I don't have the time to organize and actually rehearse that much. But then it's like, well, I need to be doing that by myself if I'm going to be a solo artist.
Do you feel like there is a big difference playing with younger as opposed to older musicians, besides maybe a depth of experience or skill? Do you feel like there are big differences in how they approach music?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a sense of security and there's a sense of ease playing with older musicians. There's a sense of just, we're just going for a walk in the park, so to speak, or it's just this sixth sense. It's this extra level. It's a communication thing. Whereas I think with some younger musicians, they're thinking about, well, am I playing in time? What's my technique? What's the song? Where does the bridge go? Like, there's just too much thought process. I think older musicians have just detached themselves from the music, so they can actually put their own personality on it. That's what I would say to that. As a younger musician, you're still trying to figure out the music. You're still trying to figure out who you are and what you want to say. So I mean, a teacher in Australia said to me, "You won't sound good until you're in your 40s." And I was like, wow, that's a pretty harsh statement, but it's pretty true. Like you got to play a lot and you got to really make a lot of mistakes and really experiment to sort of be comfortable within your own skin. I mean, that's not just a musical thing. It's like accept who you are and what your strengths are. And I think if you walk on stage with that, then people can, there's a lot of trust, I would say, that comes into playing music. Can I trust you that you're going to, whatever instrument you're playing, that you're going to do your job, that actually what you're talking about here is serving the song.
Fair enough. Well, Simon, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you giving me your time. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Baptiste, for having me.
My pleasure.
It was a lot of fun.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed the interview. And now let's move on to the footnotes. Footnote number 1, Nova Daze and Simon's musical projects. A link to Simon's project Nova Daze is available in the description. Footnote number 2, the Gadflys and Simon's music. You can find a link to the music of Simon's former band below. I have also linked more of Simon's music that I encourage you to listen to. Footnote number 3, furniture music. Furniture music, or in French, musique d'ameublement, is background music originally played by live performers. The term was coined by Erik Satie in 1917, when he used it to qualify 5 short pieces that he composed, which were meant to be played in a loop. These pieces were not published until 25 years after the composer's death. At the end of the 20th century, the minimalist composer John Cage took a particular interest in them and performed them along with other parts of Satie's catalogue. In 1971, along with other pianists, he famously played the piece Vexation 840 times, as apparently requested by the composer on the score, in a performance that lasted over 18 hours. Footnote number 4, Tribes. What Simon is referring to here is Seth Godin's book Tribes, a link to which is available in the description. Footnote number 5, The Deaths of Jaco and Jimi. Jimi Hendrix died of an overdose of barbiturates in September 1970. It was not a violent death in the sense that he was not murdered, but his untimely demise certainly contributed to his iconic status, as it did for the other members of the 27 Club. Jaco died of a brain hemorrhage in September 1987 at the age of 35 after a confrontation with the club owner. You can learn more about his life in the 2014 documentary Jaco that I warmly recommend. Generally, it's interesting to consider the extent to which extra musical factors, often tragic, bolster the fame of legendary musicians. This tendency does not seem to be limited to arts. For example, in the realm of theoretical physics, the fact that Stephen Hawking is more well known by lay people than Paul Dirac or Roger Penrose surely has something to do with his handicap, his vulgarization books, and his antics. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean in any way to diminish the value of his contributions to the field, but simply to observe that there does not seem to be a straightforward link between fame and competence. The latter does not systematically lead to the former. There needs to be other ingredients involved. Footnote number 6, the monomyth. What Simon is referring to here is the idea of the hero's journey, a common template of a broad category of tales and lore that involves a hero who goes on an adventure, wins a victory in a decisive crisis, and then comes home changed or transformed and bestowing boons on his people. It was famously described by the comparative mythologist Joseph Campbell in his 1949 book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. According to his theory, any compelling story needs to follow the different steps of the hero's journey. Of course, that's a problematic and relatively nebulous idea, but many creators subscribe to it, including the filmmaker George Lucas, who used it to create the story arc of Star Wars. Footnote number 7, Concrete and Gold. Concrete and Gold is the 9th studio album by the Foo Fighters, which was released in September 2017. The album was produced by the pop music producer Greg Kurstin and featured collaborations with Sean Stockman of Boyz II Men, Justin Timberlake, and Paul McCartney, among others. Footnote number 8, Michael Beinhorn. Michael Beinhorn is an American musician and rock music record producer. He has produced multiple albums for the bands Red Hot Chili Peppers, Hole, Violent Femmes, and Marilyn Manson. He has also worked with Brian Eno, Herbie Hancock, Soundgarden, Ozzy Osbourne, Aerosmith, Korn, and more. He is the author of the book Unlocking Creativity, a producer's guide to making music and art. Footnote number 9. Victor Wooten's Amazing Grace. One of the first bass videos that I remember ever seeing is Victor's Amazing Grace solo with Bella Fleck and the Flecktones, a link to which is available below. Footnote number 10. Will Jacobs. Simon is currently playing with the guitar player and singer Will Jacobs. I've linked one of their live performances in description. Well, that's it for the footnotes. I hope that you enjoyed the episode with my guest Simon Horn. That was Baptiste Vattiez for XPol, and that's all for now.